Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. As Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base thrummed with power, the face up above emitted more and more pressure. A moment later, he retracted his cultivation base power, and the face vanished. Why you? Big Fatty Zhang could hardly breathe, to the point where his face turned crimson. Utter disbelief shone in his eyes, and his mind spun as surely as if someone were hitting him in the head. Xu Baosai's reaction was similar. As he thought back to everything that had just happened, suddenly, it all made sense. Li Shendao's politeness, and the fact that the Li clan had suddenly treated him and Big Fatty Zhang like royalty, was all because of Bai Xiaochun's status in the sect. Bai Xiaochun is a diva. Big Fatty Zhang's heart began to pound with excitement, and then his eyes started shining. He slapped his thigh. Ha ha ha. From now on, nobody in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect will dare to mess with me. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased to see Big Fatty Zhang so excited. Thumping himself on the chest, he said, "That's right. Nobody in the sect will ever cause problems for either of you, ever again." Xu Baosai had obviously already reached the same conclusion. He couldn't help but think about all of the female cultivators he had taken a liking to over the years, none of whom had ever paid much attention to him. But things were different now. Now that the junior patriarch is a diva, he thought, the fact that I'm so close to him means that those girls will start banging down the door to get to me. His excitement about what was to come began to soar to epic heights. As for Big Fatty Zhang, his heart was racing, both with excitement for Bai Xiaochun, and also anticipation for the future. He had endured quite a bit of hardship in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, mostly because he had no powerful person backing him. He and Xu Baosai had been forced to swallow their anger and act with the utmost caution in everything. But now everything had changed. His close friend was a diva patriarch, which meant he had free rein to act however he wanted to in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. And thus, Bai Xiaochun led the elated Big Fatty Zhang and Xu Baosai back to his immortals cave on the Blue Rainbow. Now that he was a sect elder and a diva, he had a residence that was roughly the same as those of the other devas. The only difference was that he had no clan to occupy the area. And thus, he immediately invited Big Fatty Zhang and Xu Baosai to live with him. His residence was filled with countless spectacular buildings and structures, as well as strong spiritual energy from the heaven-span sea. As far as Big Fatty Zhang and Xu Baosai were concerned, they were living in a dream now. "Xiaochun, I've made a decision," Big Fatty Zhang announced. "We need to have a powerful faction of our own within the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. The other 5 diva patriarchs all have a bunch of powerful experts working for them, and we need the same thing. I've gotten to know a lot of people over the years, so we should have plenty to pick from." "That's exactly right," Xu Baosai said. "There are plenty of disciples in the sect who have yet to realize their dreams. Now that you're a diva, junior patriarch, it's the perfect way to give them their shot at glory." With that, he pulled a little notebook out of the folds of his robe and started flipping through it to identify potential recruits. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with how enthusiastic Big Fatty Zhang and Xu Baosai were acting. After some thought, he decided that they were exactly right. After all, he already missed his army of corpse troopers from back in Archemperor City. Therefore, he immediately gave Big Fatty Zhang and Xu Baosai authorization to start gathering people to form a new faction. In fact, at Xu Baosai's request, he issued a dharmic decree, giving the two of them the power and authority to do it officially. With that, they hurried away, dharmic decree in hand, eager to make contact with their network in the sect, both to show off, and also to gather people to their side to go harass their enemies. With an official dharmic decree, the sky was the limit. Now that he had rescued his friends, Bai Xiaochun could finally relax. Most of the important tasks he had set out to do had now been accomplished. With Big Fatty Zhang and Xu Baosai tasked with building up power within the sect, he could relax and start thinking about his cultivation. "I need to keep working on my undying blood, but that requires a lot of life force. Now that I'm a diva patriarch, that shouldn't be too hard to accomplish. But I still need a diva technique." After some thought, he stood up and vanished, to reappear in a central location on the Blue Rainbow, where a 7-story pagoda rose high into the air. It was called the Starry Sky Pavilion, and was a repository for many of the legacies in the sect. Quite a few divine abilities and magical techniques were kept there. As for the diva-level Taoist magics, they were specifically stored on the 7th story. An ordinary disciple could visit the lower 6 stories if they had a high cultivation base and plenty of merit points. But Bai Xiaochun was a prime elder, which meant he had free access to the entire Starry Sky Pavilion. Furthermore, there were no merit point requirements for him. Including him, there were only 7 total people in the sect who had such access, the Devas and the demigod patriarch. Bai Xiaochun materialized directly on the 7th story of the pagoda. The only thing present there was a simple, unadorned table, in the middle of which rested 9 ancient bamboo slips. They were clearly items which had existed for countless years, and all of them had cracks covering their surfaces. Obviously, they were all originals, and not copies. Surrounding the 9 bamboo slips were 3 rings of jade slips, which contained several dozen different techniques. Obviously, the jade slips were inferior to the bamboo slips, and contained incomplete techniques. He sent some divine sense out to scan the various slips, and was shocked by what he discovered. They're all Diva-level Taoist magics? Back in the river-defying sect, they only had 2 Diva-level Taoist magics, which were both incomplete. But the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect had many. Bai Xiaochun now had a much clearer understanding of how deep the reserve powers of the sect ran. After scanning all of the techniques with divine sense to get a basic idea of what they were about, he confirmed his previous conjecture that the 9 bamboo slips were the most complete of the various techniques. He saw Li Shendao's sword technique, Chen Hichan's devil technique, and Bai Zhenchun's cosmic chessboard. Of course, before selecting a given technique, he could only see its basic description, and none of the important details. The 3 concentric rings of jade slips all contained incomplete techniques, with the outermost of the rings containing the least complete of all. Some of the techniques he recognized as ones used by Patriarchs Starry River, Tao River, and Polarity River. There were also some that he had never heard of before. The ones in the middle of the table are the best, he thought, frowning. After looking at the 9 bamboo slips again, he realized that, despite how complete they were all in completely different categories than the techniques he had cultivated up till now. They were core Diva-level Taoist magics of the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect, and in order to cultivate them, one needed to have a certain foundation of techniques to work upon. Back in core formation, I worked on the frigid school while evolving Incantation. In the wildlands, I reached the nascent soul stage by using spirit enhancement techniques, and therefore didn't get a special technique. Now that I'm a diva, it's very important that I get an appropriate Taoist magic. After more thought, he examined what was available, until something caught his eye on the outermost of the 3 rings. The only downside to it was how incomplete it was. It was called the Sun Moon Vast Sky Incantation. Just as its impressive name indicated, cultivating it allowed one to produce an additional sun and moon in the sky. Supposedly, it was a technique that came from the ancient Arch-Emperor dynasty. It had been incomplete when discovered, and its true origins had never been determined. However, after much research, it was determined that cultivating it all the way to the 9th level would allow one to break into the demigod realm, and consume suns and moons. It's too bad that this version of the Sun-Moon Vast Sky Incantation only goes up to the 3rd level. That would get me to the mid-diva realm. The rest of the technique has been lost to the sands of time. Bai Xiaochun was torn about what to do. Also inscribed on the jade slip was information from 3 diva patriarchs of the past, people who had long since perished, but who had cultivated the Sun-Moon Vast Sky Incantation. That information contained tips and bits of enlightenment from those 3 patriarchs. Most of them expressed regret at not having the full technique. One of them even pointed out that the full technique would be powerful even after breaking through to the demigod realm. It truly was a domineering technique, and very different from other, ordinary diva-level Taoist magics. By refining the spiritual power of heaven and earth, one could create a sun and a moon inside oneself. When those heavenly bodies emerged out into the open, they would truly be a second sun and moon in the vast sky. It was a level of power that was shocking to even contemplate. The technique didn't require any specific foundation, only a diva cultivation base. It contained countless variations within it, and could be used in combination with any other technique. The main downside was that it only consisted of the first 3 levels. Furthermore, the 3rd level had been added by a past patriarch, and was therefore a derivative technique, and not authentic. The 2nd level was the highest authentic level in the entire technique. Anyone who cultivated it would eventually have to change to another technique after reaching the mid-diva realm, which was exactly what the other 3 patriarchs who had cultivated it ended up doing. None of the other techniques will work for me, so I guess I'll pick this one. Although it will only work for so long, considering that my apprentice is the Hell Emperor, and an omnipotent genius, it's always possible that I might be able to work out the higher levels on my own. After a bit more thought, he gritted his teeth, grabbed the Sun-Moon Vast Sky Incantation, and left the Starry Sky Pavilion. He reappeared moments later back in his residence, where he went into secluded meditation and poured himself into the study of his new technique. The more he learned about it, the more he realized it was truly astonishing. This thing shouldn't be called the Sun-Moon Vast Sky Incantation. It should be called the Sun-Moon Super Overpowered Incantation. The first 3 levels are devoted to summoning a moon inside oneself. After reaching the 3rd level, that moon can emerge into the world to hang in the sky. The missing middle levels are about summoning a sun. From what I can tell, the final 3 levels must be about bringing both the sun and the moon out into the open, and illuminating all creation with their brilliance. Sighing, he set to work at cultivating the 1st level. In terms of the life force he needed to work on his undying blood, now that he had such a high status in the sect, it was easier for him to request large amounts of plants and vegetation that had life force in them. In fact, as a prime elder, he could set sect missions for apothecary cultivators in the sect to concoct medicine for him. Although he happened to be of the opinion that the medicinal pills concocted by others would be of lower quality, after wrestling with the issue for a while, he sighed and made up his mind. I can't do the concocting myself. Whenever I do that, accidents happen. Now that the demigod patriarch is my direct superior, it would be a big headache if I caused some disaster. It was with a bit of regret that he decided to have lower-ranking disciples do the concocting for him. One upside was that it led to large amounts of pills flowing in, and allowed him to advance by leaps and bounds with his undying blood. His regret at not being able to personally make the pills could only be shoved down to the bottom of his heart. In the blink of an eye, 3 months passed. During that time, Bai Xiaochun focused only on cultivating his undying blood and the Sun-Moon Vast Sky Incantation. As he did, he came to realize what it meant to occupy one of the highest positions in the sect, and have access to so many cultivation resources. In fact, he used so many resources that, if he had been back in the river-defying sect, he would have bled them dry. To the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, though, such usage of resources was considered negligible. After all, back before the Great Wall had collapsed, the resources required to man it had vastly surpassed anything that Bai Xiaochun could match. Even that level of expenditure had not been a problem for the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's reserves, which had been built up over tens upon tens of thousands of years. Another thing Bai Xiaochun came to realize was that the 4 demigod heavenly kings in the Wildlands actually couldn't compare at all to the demigods in the river source sects of the Heavenspan River region, at least in terms of wealth. The resources at the disposal of the river source sects vastly surpassed the heavenly kings. Of course, the Heavenspan River region wasn't without its weaknesses. There was something the Wildlands had that was sadly lacking the Heavenspan River. And that was fighting spirit and valiance. In the Wildlands, soul cultivators lived hard and difficult lives. In contrast, the Heavenspan River cultivators were like flowers in a greenhouse. Whether it was in terms of bravery or ambition, they didn't even come close to comparing to the Wildlanders. Perhaps that was why the 2 sides had been at a deadlock for so long. Now that the Great Wall had fallen, it was difficult to say which side would have the advantage. It was a big headache to consider the matter for even a short time. Therefore, he put it aside and focused on his cultivation. Another thing that happened during the 3 months that passed was that his faction grew with shocking speed. Big Fatty Zhang and Shu Baosai had not wasted their years in the sect. Although they had conducted themselves with the utmost caution over the years, they had also worked hard to expand their network of contacts. It didn't take long for them to gather a group of disciples who had previously never had a chance to rise to prominence. They were the ones who formed the backbone of Bai Xiaochun's faction now that he was a prime elder. They even had 9 nascent soul elders, one of them being Feng Yud. There were even more core formation and foundation establishment cultivators, and overall, they formed a very powerful group. After all, Big Fatty Zhang and Shu Baosai had gained a lot of experience back in Sky City, which they drew upon to grow their organization both quickly and with great strength. Li Shundao followed through with his promise of compensation. Originally, he had planned to keep things low-key, but after finding out the truth of the matter, he realized that if he didn't act decisively, the truce he had worked out would crumble, and his relationship with Bai Xiaochun would be grievously damaged. As a diva patriarch, he had many descendants, and therefore, he acted with brutal decisiveness. The first thing he did was deliver up the head of the nascent soul elder who had been the primary culprit. Then he crippled Li Yuansheng's cultivation base and locked him up in the very same prison where Big Fatty Zhang and Shu Baosai had been held. Bai Xiaochun had no complaints about how the matter was handled, and Big Fatty Zhang and Shu Baosai were both quite pleased. After all was said and done, the relationship between Li Shundao and Bai Xiaochun ended up relatively warm, and the friction from the matter of the river-defying sect was smoothed over. At the same time, because of Bai Xiaochun's position, and the growth of his faction, there was no need for any requests or negotiations regarding his inn in Sky City. The Celestial Sky Society took the initiative to return it to him. The Celestial Sky Society had the same boss as many years ago. Trembling with fear, he personally went to visit Bai Xiaochun to handle matters. The man's heart was filled with endless sighs. Never could he have imagined that the same Bai Xiaochun with whom he had squabbled over resources in Sky City would, only a handful of decades later, become the 6th Prime Elder in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, a person of utmost power and authority. Bai Xiaochun had an audience with the boss of the Celestial Sky Society, but didn't say much. After all, he had learned a lot from them. In fact, it was his experiences with the Celestial Sky Society that had enabled him to deal with the 9 Serenities King's heir apparent back in Arch-Emperor City. And it was by copying their tactics that he routed the 2 celestial necromancers who had plotted against him. However, the fact that Bai Xiaochun didn't say much in the meeting caused the man's nervousness to mount until he was soaked with sweat. Eventually, Xu Baosai gave him a good glare, frightening the man so much that he offered even more copious gifts of compensation than he had initially intended to. At that point, Big Fatty Zhang and Xu Baosai were finally pleased with the outcome. More months passed. Bai Xiaochun now had a very solid foundation in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, and his faction was so big and powerful that people all over the Heavenspan River region had heard of them, including the other 3 river source sects. Rumors even began to spread in the wildlands about the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's 6th diva, Bai Xiaochun. Many people gritted their teeth in frustration at how Bai Xiaochun seemed to move about so mysteriously. After all, he had roamed the wildlands for many years, without a single person ever being able to track him down. Only the most powerful elites in the wildlands knew who Bai Xiaochun really was, and they were all shocked by the rumors. That was especially true of the Grand Heavenmaster, who was struck speechless by the intelligence reports from the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. Back in Giant Ghost City, the Giant Ghost King heard the news, and muttered, "The little punk didn't even say goodbye to me when he left. Next time I see him, I'll definitely give him a good thrashing." Also in the wildlands was an illusory river high in the sky, in the depths of which was a pitch-black palace. Bai Hao was there, clad in his imperial robes and wearing an imperial crown. Normally speaking, a cold expression covered his face. However, whenever he looked in the direction of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, his eyes shone with warmth and respect. The vast resources available in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect allowed Bai Xiaochun's cultivation to advance smoothly and quickly. By the time he had been in secluded meditation for the better part of a year, the river-defying sect had united the Middle Reaches cultivation world. Of course, the river-defying sect knew how to maintain propriety. They didn't exterminate the Starry, Polarity, and Dao River courts. They kept them around, but in check. In fact, in addition to the yearly tribute given to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, those 3 sects also gave tribute to the river-defying sect. Although Chen Hichan, Li Shundao and Bai Xiaochun weren't happy about that, they had enough experience in life to know when to keep their heads down. They were fairly certain that they would have their chance at a comeback eventually, and besides, considering how young Bai Xiaochun was, it wasn't likely that he would stay in the sect for very long. Bai Xiaochun had remained in secluded meditation the entire time, whereas Li Shundao had smoothed out his relationship with Bai Xiaochun, and therefore didn't feel the need to remain in seclusion. As for Chen Hichan, he had no choice but to leave the sect indefinitely. From all of that, it was possible to see how much of a name Bai Xiaochun had made for himself in the battle for the river-defying sect. He had almost unlimited resources at his disposal, and because of that, was initially excited to be able to work on his cultivation. However, after some time passed, he started to get bored. Eventually, he began to go for walks in the sect, and yet, because of his high standing, people would only treat him with formal respect. Although he enjoyed that type of thing, eventually, it started to get annoying. This is so boring. There's nothing fun to do in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect at all. The whole sect is so prissy and old-fashioned. It was way better back in the wildlands. Sighing, he thought back to everything that had happened since he got back to the Heavenspan River region. Things had been interesting in the river-defying sect, but after returning to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, he realized that it really was a very humdrum place. He thought about going to hassle Chen Hichan, but 2 things held him back. First of all, he lacked a good excuse. Second of all, and of even greater significance, was the fact that Chen Hichan had left the sect. Bai Xiaochun was next on his list, but apparently Bai Lin knew Bai Xiaochun too well. Sensing what was about to come, he hurried over to reminisce about old times until eventually, their conversation ended with Bai Lin gazing at him with helpless anxiety. By that point, Bai Xiaochun realized that he couldn't go cause problems for Bai Zhenchen. That left only Li Shendao. Unfortunately, Li Shendao had been behaving himself perfectly. He had compensated him for the matter with Big Fatty Zhang and Shu Baosai, and that meant it would be very awkward to go bully him. By this point, Bai Xiaochun was so depressed and bored that he felt like he was starting to grow mold. At one point, he went out looking for some attractive female disciples, but the problem was that his status was too high, and he enjoyed carrying himself like someone from the senior generation. And for someone like that to try to seduce pretty female disciples didn't seem very appropriate. He sighed, how come none of them will make the first move? Well, I can't just sit around practicing cultivation all the time. I'll end up cultivating myself into a moron. All of a sudden, he realized that, while he had missed the Heavenspan River region during his time in the Wildlands, now that he was back, he actually missed Arch-Emperor City. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that he had nothing else to do other than work on cultivation. Unfortunately, he really was not happy using medicinal pills concocted by random disciples. And yet, he was still torn about whether or not to do his own medicine concocting. Don't tell me that a grand and mighty diva like myself will end up having to slink outside of the sect to concoct some pills. He sighed again. No, I have to concoct some pills of my own. If worst comes to worst, I'll just have to be extra careful. In the past, people would always come to cause problems for me when I concocted medicine. But now I'm a prime elder. Chen Hichan ran away, Bai Zhenchen is in secluded meditation, and Li Shendao doesn't dare to cause problems for me. My bro in the Hall of Steel Veins is on my side. In the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, the only person who can tell me what to do is the demigod patriarch. The more he thought about it, the more antsy he got, until he finally made a decision. As long as I'm careful, everything should be fine. Encouraging himself in this way, he sent a list of required materials to the Internal Affairs Pavilion. The list included medicinal ingredients and a large number of pill furnaces. Considering his standing in the sect, he had a sizable stipend that could get him things like this without having to provide compensation. The staff at the Internal Affairs Pavilion immediately set to work filling the orders, sending large quantities of medicinal plants and pills to Bai Xiaochun. He was delighted to see the huge accumulation of resources, and quickly went into seclusion to start working. East Wind Life Force Pill. Intoxication Life Force Pill. Spirit Flower Life Force Pill. 9 Transformations Life Force Pill. He immediately began to think back to all of the medicine formulas he knew that related to life force. He tried out each formula, but the resulting pills all had the same problem. They simply didn't provide the level of life force that he needed. However, he was very pleased to discover that no accidents were happening. As a result, his confidence grew, and he began working, not just with 1 pill furnace but 10. Then 30. Then 50. All the successes got him feeling very excited, and also lucky. I guess that all the trials I went through in the wildlands ended up pushing my Tao of medicine to a much higher level. Yeah, that must be the explanation. Feeling prouder of himself than ever, he continued adding pill furnaces until he was working with 80 at the same time. Slowly but surely, he was immersing himself in his concocting efforts. Perhaps his skill in the Tao of medicine really had improved. Or perhaps it was because he was worried about the demigod patriarch, and was thus being very careful. Either way, his concocting went very smoothly, and not a single accident occurred. The worst things that happened were the occasional explosion, which would release some black smoke. There was also an occasional bout of lightning. However, considering the level of Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base, he was able to negate these effects easily. Few disciples even noticed what was happening, and of those who did, none dared to say anything. A few months later, he was in the middle of a concocting session when a message came down from the demigod patriarch. It was actually a group message sent to all of the prime elders. The patriarch explained that he had received a summons from the Celestial, and had to take a trip to Heavenspan Island. While he was gone, he was entrusting the safety of the sect to the devas. It was something the other devas were used to. It was not a rare occurrence for the demigod patriarch to take a trip outside of the sect and leave them in charge. However, this was Bai Xiaochun's first time experiencing such a thing. Although it was par for the course for the other devas, it was different for him. As soon as he heard the news, he gasped, and his heart started to race. He was so excited he almost jumped up into the air. He suddenly felt as if anything in the world was possible for him. The demigod patriarch left. For the first time, there was no one in the starry sky Tao polarity sect who could tell him what to do. The demigod patriarch is gone. He threw his head back and laughed uproariously. He had always been extremely careful when he went about concocting medicine. After all, there had been too many occasions when people chased him down angrily as a result of his work. The mere thought of what it was like trying to explain himself to an angry mob caused him to sigh incessantly. But now, all obstacles had been cleared from his path. Furthermore, he had the strong feeling that things were going so well that no accidents could possibly happen. Concoct medicine. Concoct medicine. I'm going to concoct medicine to my heart's content. I can finally perfect my lightning detox grand magic. I can refine my aphrodisiac pill. I can improve on my fantasy pill. And I can come up with some more mystery pills too. Filled with excitement and anticipation, he jumped directly from 80 pill furnaces to 300. Worried that it wasn't enough, he added several hundred more. Only when he had 800 pill furnaces going at the same time was he happy. I'm using my diva cultivation base to operate 800 furnaces at the same time. If word got out, people would admire me to no end. He looked around proudly at all the pill furnaces, beneath which burned supreme-grade flamestones, causing ripples of heat to fill the air. It was a sight that would surely strike fear into the hearts of anyone who saw it. After all, if 800 pill furnaces exploded simultaneously, then it would probably destroy most of the blue rainbow. On the morning of the third day after the demigod patriarch left, a huge boom erupted from the blue rainbow, startling numerous disciples in the sect. What was that sound? Scared me half to death. What's going on? Damn it, who did that? I was in the middle of cultivation, and nearly experienced energy deviation. Countless angry curses filled the air, and dozens of cultivators actually flew up into the air angrily to determine what was happening. However, when they realized that the noise came from the blue rainbow, their eyes went wide with shock, and they flew back down to where they came from. The boom came when 10 pill furnaces exploded, and startled Bai Xiaochun so badly that he immediately sent out some divine sense to see if anyone was going to come berate him. He even instinctively began to come up with an explanation. However, after a long moment passed, the clamor in the sect died down. Nobody came looking for him. The people who did fly up into the air only looked in his direction, then went back to where they had come from. Only at that point did he finally realize what was happening. Ha ha ha, I was just being too jumpy, that's all. I forgot that nobody in the starry sky Tao polarity sect can tell me what to do. Feeling quite emboldened, he went back to concocting medicine. A few days later, another boom rocked the sect. To most disciples, an occasional explosion like that wasn't anything to get upset about. However, the booms continued every few days. On one particular day, there were 8 in a row. Soon, the disciples on the rainbow were starting to go crazy. It only made sense for them to react in such a way. The sect was usually a quiet place, like a celestial paradise. But now, startling explosions were interrupting them all the time, making it almost impossible to focus on cultivation. Normally speaking, a person in the sect who did such a thing would be attacked and likely killed. But the noise was coming from the blue rainbow. Soon, people began to ask around, and found that Patriarch Bai was concocting medicine. Therefore, nobody dared to complain openly. If the only thing they had to deal with were booms, it might have been possible to get used to the situation. But 2 days later, smoke began to drift out, smoke that caused tears to well up in the eyes of everyone it touched. Ag, what kind of medicinal pill is Patriarch Bai concocting? No, I can't take this. It wasn't just the ordinary disciples who were affected. Li Shendao and Bai Zhenshen were included, and yet, neither of them dared to interfere. If they couldn't do anything about what was happening, then there was no need to even mention the lower-ranking disciples. All they could do was stare up resentfully at the blue rainbow. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was too thoroughly engrossed in his work to have any idea that all of that was happening. His face was gaunt, but filled with excitement as he worked to make every type of pill he could think of that had something to do with life force. As he became more familiar with the various formulas, his skill in the Tao of medicine increased. He made all varieties of pills, and eventually started to get bored with life force pills. As his confidence grew, he came to the conclusion that he had turned over a new leaf in his pill concocting ability. I need to make a treasured pill that can counteract the effects of the aphrodisiac pill. He had already been ensnared twice with aphrodisiac pills, and although he had to admit that he had actually enjoyed the results, it was still quite a loss of face. HMMMPHH. How ridiculous that other people would use my own medicinal pill against me. That won't do. I'm going to make a new pill that I'll call the turn-off pill. The more he thought about it, the more pleased he was with the idea. Furthermore, the name of the pill couldn't have been better. It's definitely a good name. Feeling supremely proud of himself, he started concocting. You know what's a real turn-off? Those uncaring fruits. They're disgusting. Only by adding that type of fruit into the formula can I truly quench the fire which burns deep inside one's heart. Slowly but surely, a medicine formula was forming in his mind. After settling on an initial direction, he decided to run some tests. He started with 30 medicinal pills. He was so engrossed in his work that he forgot to eat or sleep, and watched over the pill furnaces constantly for 3 whole days. Soon, the pills inside the furnaces were beginning to form. Unfortunately, just as the process seemed on the verge of concluding, one of the pill furnaces suddenly showed signs of instability. Bai Xiaochun quickly placed sealing marks on it, only to find that a second, a third, and a fourth furnace were similarly destabilizing. Before he could do anything about it, all 30 pill furnaces were teetering on the verge of exploding. Not good. Bai Xiaochun slapped down more sealing marks, and sent his divine sense out to try to keep any danger to a minimum. Actually, because there was no one in the sect who could tell him what to do, he had kindly decided that, as a sect patriarch, he should manage himself. However, when the pill furnaces exploded, a black smoke erupted out that not even he could control. It completely negated his divine sense. Thankfully, there wasn't much of the smoke, and all it did was cover part of the blue rainbow. One of the affected areas, though, was where the Starry Sky Tao Polarity Superstars trials were held. Quite a few disciples were there, and before any of them could react, the smoke had covered them. Bai Xiaochun anxiously looked over to see what was going to happen. However, the smoke simply faded away, and the disciples looked around with quizzical expressions on their faces. As for Bai Xiaochun, he initially stared in shock, and then breathed a sigh of relief. Wait, nothing happened? Well, no harm no foul. Rubbing his nose a bit, he continued to watch until he was sure nothing bad had resulted. Then he started thinking about why he might have failed, and decided to try a different approach, this time with 100 pill furnaces. Worried about the lower-ranking disciples who had been hit by the smoke, he sent his divine sense out and prepared to react protectively at the slightest sign of danger. 3 more days passed, and soon, the second batch of pills was nearing completion. Up to this point, no unusual behavior had cropped up among the disciples from earlier. However, it was on the night of the 3rd day that some strange things started to happen. The Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect was a huge sect with many disciples, so it was only natural for many of them to get together as Taoist partners. Among those disciples who had been at the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect trial, those who had no Taoist partners weren't affected at all, except that they were less interested in romantic relationships than before. However, those who did have Taoist partners, whether they were men or women, found that, as the sun set on their immortals' caves, "Junior sister, we're just not suited for each other. From now on, you do your thing, and I'll do mine. Let's break up. Elder brother, why are there so many good-looking people in the world, but so few interesting souls? From now on, stay away from me. I'm sorry, but we're just not meant for each other. My destiny is to pursue the great Tao. What's the point of romantic relationships? Don't even bring the subject up again." Quite a few people were taken aback by the breakup scenes going on. And of course, Bai Xiaochun noticed almost right away, and his heart began to pound. Wait a second, that's not right. All of a sudden, he had a very bad feeling. After all, the primary ingredient in his turn-off pill was uncaring fruit. Using that in combination with some other medicinal plants he knew of, he had hoped to create a medicinal pill that would counteract the aphrodisiac pill. And aphrodisiac pills affected a person first physically and then mentally. Therefore, his plan for the turn-off pill had been to affect a person mentally first, and after that, to cleanse them physically. The current situation went totally beyond what he had imagined would happen. And of course, it caused worry to gnaw at his heart. I wanted a turn-off pill, not a breakup pill. I can't just let this happen. I have to do something. With that, he settled his mind. After all, considering that only a few people had been affected 3 days ago, the situation shouldn't be very hard to remedy. However, even as he made his decision about what to do, cracking sounds reached his ears, and his face fell as he looked at the 100 pill furnaces, which had all reached the critical moment of the concocting process. 10 of those 100 pill furnaces had cracks spreading out over their surfaces. No, he screamed, rushing forward to try to contain the situation. Boom! The pill furnaces exploded, not just a handful, but all 100 of them, one after another in a rapid-fire chain reaction. It happened in a single breath of time, and despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun had been prepared, he simply wasn't fast enough to contain the effects of 100 pill furnaces all exploding at the same time. The force unleashed was shocking. Thankfully, he had his diva cultivation base and very tough skin, otherwise, he would either have been killed, or at the least, badly injured. No, he screamed. His immortal's cave shook violently, and yet, that was not what worried Bai Xiaochun most. Most hair-raising was the thick black smoke that blasted out at high speed in all directions. The medicinal efficacy of this smoke vastly surpassed that of the previous smoke. Because of the diva power that Bai Xiaochun surrounded himself with, he was protected from its effects, but others nearby did not have that luxury. As he let out a long cry of misery, the smoke covered the blue rainbow in its entirety. But things didn't end there. The smoke spread out toward the other rainbows, completely covering 3 of them before finally coming to a stop. Bai Xiaochun's vision went dim, and his mind felt like it was being struck by heavenly lightning. He knew that he had caused a major disaster. I'm finished. Kaput. This was definitely not how he had envisioned things turning out, and it felt very unfair. Why did he, an awesome apothecary with incredible skill in the Tao of medicine, always cause strange things like this to happen? Meanwhile, the disciples who were on the 3 affected rainbows stared around in shock. Some reacted quickly enough to speed away in the face of the black smoke, but others were inundated. Damn it, what is this stuff? Smoke? Heavens! How could there be toxic smoke inside the sect? Wait, are we under attack? The 3 rainbows instantly devolved into chaos. Li Shundao, Bai Xiaochun, and Patriarch Steelveins were all shocked, and rushed out to provide aid. When they saw how 3 of the other rainbows were covered in the smoke, their hearts were gripped with madness. Thankfully, the smoke went away rather quickly. The entire thing only lasted for a bit more than 10 breaths of time. Then, everything went back to normal. It was only at that point that people realized that the sound of the explosion had come from the blue rainbow. Elder Bai is definitely concocting medicine again. Heavens, when is this going to end? Elder Bai isn't concocting medicine, is he? He's trying to destroy the entire sect. It only took moments for countless angry gazes to fall onto the blue rainbow. Can't anyone stop him? If things keep going on like this, what are we supposed to do? However, there was nothing more that they could do than glare. Any other person, even a nascent soul expert, would already have been surrounded and attacked, but Bai Xiaochun's status in the sect was too high. After all, he was a diva, and one of only 6 prime elders, a fact which filled the hearts of all disciples with fear. Li Shundao hesitated about what to do, and finally decided to do nothing. Bai Xiaochun reacted similarly. However, Patriarch Steelveins smiled wryly, and then sent Bai Xiaochun a message of inquiry. Bai Xiaochun replied immediately. This was the last time. I guarantee it. Deeply worried, he did his best to explain the matter, and then sank down into thought. Although no one else had any clue at the moment, he was very well aware that, despite the fact that the smoke had dissipated without seeming to affect anyone, it would be, at most, 3 days, until the effects were seen. At that point, tens of thousands of disciples would all break up with their Taoist partners. Bai Xiaochun knew that a disaster like that was simply too much. People say that if you break up someone's relationship, you shorten their lifespan. Heavens, I might have just ruined the relationships of tens of thousands of disciples. If I don't fix this, nobody in the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect will be able to get a Taoist partner. This generation of the cultivation world will be significantly harmed, and it will all be my fault. That thought made Bai Xiaochun feel like his head was about to explode. Scowling on the verge of tears, he gritted his teeth and murmured, "No. I can't let that happen. I have to concoct an antidote." He took a few deep breaths, and then nervously pulled out some more medicinal plants. His goal? Create a medicinal pill that could dispel the effects of the uncaring fruit. I didn't want this to happen, he grumbled guiltily. I was just trying to concoct that turn-off pill. He suddenly realized that not having someone around to tell him what to do wasn't that good of a thing after all. Although his position in the sect ensured that no disciples would curse or attack him, he still felt bad. In fact, it had actually been better back when people did come after him. Besides, he didn't even want to think about what would happen if the demigod patriarch happened to come back right now. Shivering, he headed back into his private chamber to start working on a new pill formula. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, only about 6 hours before the uncaring fruit's effects would begin to manifest, Bai Xiaochun leapt up, hair disheveled, and eyes flashing with madness. Staring at the jade slip he held in his hand, he cried, "I did it. I created the antidote formula." He threw his head back and laughed uproariously. fellow Taoists of the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. I am here to save you. With that, he ignored his exhaustion and set to work concocting the medicine. In order to maximize the chances of succeeding, he used 300 pill furnaces. He was putting everything on the line in the hopes of negating the effects of the uncaring fruit. As time passed, he concentrated fully on the 300 pill furnaces. None of them showed any signs of exploding, and whenever the slightest irregularity cropped up, he would make adjustments immediately. Finally, when there was only 1 hour left until the effects of the uncaring fruit manifested, the 300 pill furnaces turned bright red, and sent a pungent odor out in all directions. When Bai Xiaochun detected that odor, he finally relaxed a bit. Excellent. In order to negate the effects of the uncaring fruit, I added in black crabapple, which can affect all sorts of various human emotions and desires. By combining those effects with certain other types of plants and vegetation, I can definitely negate the uncaring fruit. Although he was excited, he hesitated for a moment. According to his calculations, the effects of the uncaring fruit would begin to manifest at any moment. One last time, he sent his divine sense out through the sect, and could already see some disciples heading toward their Taoist partners with somber expressions on their faces. There was no time to waste, and neither was there time to hand out pills one by one. Eyes burning with determination, he waved his hand out in front of him. Immense force erupted out and landed on the 300 pill furnaces, which exploded, resulting in a thunderous boom that vastly surpassed any of the previous explosions. At the same time, a massive shockwave spread out in all directions. Everyone in the entire Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect heard the deafening boom, and many felt their cultivation bases destabilizing as a result. Quite a few were even struck senseless. Heavens! Don't tell me Elder Bai is concocting medicine again. I can't hear anything. Did you just say something? I'm gonna go crazy. As the cries of surprise and alarm rose up, the blue rainbow shook violently. Worse, a massive wave of black smoke rushed out from Bai Xiaochun's immortals cave. This time, even the violet rainbow, where the demigod patriarch lived, was affected. Everything was covered with black smoke. The entire Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect was enveloped in blackness, striking shock and fear into the hearts of all present. Heavens! What kind of smoke is this? Where did you guys go? I can't see anything. Run! This smoke is so acrid, it must be poison. Ag. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.